Every leader knows that a thriving organization depends on the energy, productivity, and commitment of its people. But few leaders are able to cultivate the employee engagement and performance needed for this level of success. What's the difference? Positive leadership practices. Welcome to the Positive Leadership Movement Podcast with your host, positive work culture expert, Alex Bratty. Ready to harness the power of positive leadership? Let's dive right in.
Hello and welcome to episode 30 of the Positive Leadership Movement Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Bratty, and in this episode, I'm going to share some strategies that can help you work through the challenge of returning to work and, as some might call it, a new normal, because that is the place in which we find ourselves now. But before I get into all that, as always, I just want to take a quick moment to thank you for being here. If you enjoy this show and get value from it, please subscribe, rate, and review it. And remember, if you've got a question about positive leadership, just drop me a line at questions@positiveleadershipmovement.com and I'll address it in a future episode. All right, so let's talk about this. Life is starting to resume again, whether you want it to right now or not. It's happening. I mean, as I record this episode, more than 1 million Americans have been infected and more than 71,000 have died from the coronavirus. 46 states and DC have ordered or recommended that their schools remain closed through the end of this academic year. Yet still, even with limited contact tracing and testing, and of course no vaccine yet available, many states are now reopening and people are itching to get back to work. And I get it. There is no doubt that spending weeks in lockdown mode has been challenging. It's been challenging financially, it's been challenging mentally, physically, and emotionally. I mean, almost in any way you can imagine, it has been challenging. But the fact of the matter is, COVID-19 hasn't magically disappeared. It's still a very real threat. So what does the phased reopening of the country mean for you and your organization? And that's what we're going to take a deep dive on here today. And the way I think the best way to look at this is to go back to basics. And what I mean by that is, one of the fundamental aspects of being a positive leader is to do the right thing simply because it's the right thing to do. Let me say that again. A fundamental aspect of being a positive leader is to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. So if we use that as the lens through which we're going to evaluate this current day situation, here are 4 strategies that I'm going to share with you that I hope can help you map out your organization's return to work and quote unquote a new normal, whatever that means. I know it's the term that everybody's using. Some people love it, some people hate it. It's kind of the best one I have right now. You know what I mean. All right, so strategy number 1. Perhaps this seems a little obvious, but it absolutely needs to be covered nonetheless. And strategy number 1 is this: put the safety and well-being of your team above all else. Now, let's be real, right? No one, I don't care who you are, no one can guarantee that employees are not going to get affected with, that aren't going to get infected with COVID-19 upon returning to work, right? I mean, it is absolutely a possibility, but there are numerous measures that you can take that can drastically mitigate the possibility of it happening, right? So for example, and these are just a range of different practices that I've seen out there from other leaders and organizations. You may have others, but eliminating shared desks, creating more space between coworkers, like having a coworker every other cubicle, for example, requiring the use of masks and in some cases gloves, taking temperatures with thermometers or using thermal cameras, installing plexiglass to create a physical barrier, but you can still see people through it, and of course, more frequent and deeper cleaning practices. There are others, obviously. That's just a few of them. certainly businesses are getting creative with how they're modifying their workspaces so they can accommodate this return to work during the coronavirus era. So if you want your team to return to a physical workspace, it's time to start really listing out every single step you're taking to ensure their safety. And of course, communicating what you're doing, which is part of strategy number 2. So let's go to that. So strategy number 2 is to check in with your team, right? On several levels here. We want to check in to first understand their concerns. We want to understand their needs. And as I just mentioned, we want to communicate what you're doing to address them, okay? So here's the unvarnished truth, okay? Just going out there and announcing that employees must show up at work is not exactly the most, skillful, tactful way of handling this issue right now, okay? I mean, just like your employees have had their ups and downs during this lockdown period, right? We are all humans. We've all been going through this. And many of your employees are going to have fears and concerns about returning to a physical workplace. So take the time to check in. Now, if you have a large organization, obviously you can't do this one-on-one, but you can easily and quickly send out a short survey to gauge how people are feeling. If you have a smaller team, then hold a group meeting to check in and discuss options, and then schedule individual follow-up calls so that your team members have an opportunity to connect more personally and maybe share some fears or concerns that they might not have felt as comfortable sharing in a group atmosphere, right? But you want them to feel like you truly care about how you're feeling, how they're feeling, and their concerns. And this is key to all of this, right? Is you need to be responsive to what you're hearing. And you need to communicate the various measures you're implementing to address those concerns, right? So this is all about listening. Part A, listen, but part B, respond, right? Respond and let them know that you've heard them, right? There's no point in doing any of this if you're not going to actually listen and respond and take measures that address the concerns, that address the needs, okay? And you're positive leaders, so I know you get that. All right, strategy number 3. And this is really relevant if you're in a situation where you've been remote working, right? So what we need to do as leaders right now is assess the remote working situation in a way that's going to help you and your team during this transition, okay? So interestingly, since mid-March, and this is data from the Gallup organization, so you can take it to the bank, since mid-March, the percentage of Americans working from home has jumped from 45% to 62%. That's almost 2/3 of the American workforce working from home. And so maybe there's a good chance, obviously, that your organization is one of those that has been functioning mostly or completely remotely during the lockdown phase. If that's the case, then you are probably pretty aware of the fact that some of your employees just hate this way of working and they cannot wait to get back to the office. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have those who are absolutely reveling in it. They are loving their newfound solitude. They are so much more productive, and they're dreading hearing that they've got to go back to the office, right? Like and you've got people everywhere in between, right? So those are sort of the polar ends of the spectrum. But you've got this range of attitudes towards wanting to continue working from home versus I can't wait to get back to the office, right? Now, at face value, that might look like a problem. It's not. It's actually good news, right? It's good news for a couple of reasons. First off, just from a very practical perspective, it's highly unlikely that you want to bring 100% of your workforce back into the same workspace right now, right? Like, just think about what we talked about in the first point, which is, creating more space between people so that you can be mindful of safety, right? So the good news is you probably want to phase in how many people are coming back. So that's actually helpful to this. So look at this as an opportunity for your team to leverage both their individual strengths and their life circumstances, right? So For example, those who basically they thrive in a structured and socialized environment, those folks could be the first to return, right? The ones that are literally itching to get back. Those could be among the first to return. And those who are flourishing by staying at home, or maybe they also have a situation where they have got to continue to homeschool their kids, right? Because the kids aren't at school. Those folks can stay at home, right? So there's a way to look at this. Also, you might have a business where there are maybe you've had absolute essential workers in the office this whole time, but they're on a very skeleton crew. And maybe this first phase is related to the function that people serve, right? So that the next level of essentialness, if you like, is the first phase to go back. And you kind of look at it that way. But even within that, those bands, right? So say it's sort of this next phase of essential worker. Are there ways to even phase within that, right? So that it isn't a whole department that's coming back. It's parts of the department are coming back, right? And so you can think about it in these different ways. So the level of essential worker, the individual strengths, and the life circumstances, those all play into this decision right now of who's coming back and who's staying at home. And obviously, this requires you to communicate and involve your employees, right? Like you want to hear from them. That's why strategy 2 was, hey, listen in and hear what their concerns and needs are, right? Like listen in, hear who wants to come back, hear who doesn't want to come back, and make that part of the decision-making process. Certainly, if you can accommodate what people would prefer right now, that will go a long way to mitigating fears and also just kind of keeping morale in a good space, right? Because obviously it has been challenged as we've all been in this lockdown mode. So the whole remote working situation is, it can be a resource for you, right? I mean, if nothing else, this pandemic has shown us that remote working is possible. Maybe you don't enjoy it, but you do realize that it is possible. So there is no reason to abruptly end it as everybody starts to go back to work. In fact, like I said, it's a helpful resource for you to leverage in this ongoing time of uncertainty. All right, the fourth and final strategy is, again, really a crucial part of being a positive leader. And it's true of all the steps, the strategies that I've shared this far. That strategy is this: it's to be honest and transparent. Right? In every measure that you take right now, in every decision, and just as a positive leader in general, there is an imperative to be honest with your team. In fact, this is the foundation of establishing and maintaining trust in your organization. Decades of Gallup's workplace research consistently show that trust is one of the core and universal needs of employees. So be honest that you can't fully guarantee the safety of your employees, and share what you're doing to ensure it as far as possible. Be honest that you aren't sure what business is going to look like, and share how you plan to rebuild and how people can help, right? Like how people can get vested in that rebuilding process. Be honest that you don't know exactly what life is going to look like when some employees return to the office and others stay home and continue to work remotely, and share how managers are planning to organize this, right? I mean, I could go on, but you get my point. Is be honest and acknowledge the challenge or the problem. At the same time, share what you're doing about it, or share the plan for it, or, be transparent in the decision-making process. Hey, we're thinking of doing this, but we want to hear from you. Tell us your, response to that. We're thinking of phasing in people like this. How do you feel about that, right? Like, be honest about the challenge, be transparent about the process, and you will find that your employees are much more engaged if you do this. They're much more likely to stay with you and support you if you just level with them and tell them what's going on. All right, none of this is easy. I mean, these strategies, like many strategies, are simple, but they're not easy, okay? It does take some work to implement them. It takes some mindfulness to execute on them effectively. And let's face it, no one thought they would be figuring out how to work through a pandemic, but here we are. So as a positive leader, remember, you are uniquely equipped to guide your team as it transitions back to the workplace or to a quote-unquote new normal. So I know there's a lot to figure into that whole piece, but if you let the central principle of doing what's right because it's the right thing to do, if you let that drive your decisions and actions, you're going to make it a whole lot simpler for yourself and a whole lot more straightforward as well. So let that central principle guide you in all that you are doing now. So do what's right because it's the right thing to do. All right, if you've got questions about this or you want to share how you're leading your team during this crisis, just drop me a line at questions@positiveleadershipmovement.com. I always love to hear from you. And of course, if there's a specific topic that you want me to address on the show, just let me know and I will cover it in a future episode. And if you want some simple practices that can increase positivity for you and your team, just go to my website, happinessatworknow.com, where you can download my book absolutely free. And that book is 25 Tips for Leaders, How to Leverage the Science of Happiness to Increase Performance, Productivity, and Profitability. There has never been a time where we need that more. So you can grab that book for free at my website, happinessatworknow.com. All right, that's it from me for this week. No matter what you're dealing with right now, whether you're going to continue to stay home, whether you're getting back out there or you're preparing to, please be safe and well. And thank you as always for choosing to be part of the positive leadership movement and for inspiring me to do what I do every single day.
Make sure you subscribe to the show. If you like this episode, please rate and review. If you want to get more from Alex, check out Happiness at Work, where she provides leaders with a proven path to cultivate a positive work culture that increases performance, productivity, and profitability. Go to happinessatworknow.com. Join us next week and harness the power of positive leadership for your organization.